Hello and welcome. I'm David Klenk, and this video is about installing Brusso quadrant hinges in a jewelry box. Here's the jewelry box. And these hinges are the Brusso HD638s. They're a beautiful hinge. They work really well. They have this special quadrant feature which holds the lid open, and the lid on these boxes is fairly heavy, so it's a really good idea. They operate very smoothly. The challenge is the precision of the installation. It requires a lot of very accurate cuts, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. This is episode 7 of the large jewelry box build, and we're talking all about Brusso hinges. The Brusso HD638 hinges are a really great hinge to use with jewelry boxes. This is what the package looks like. This is what you get when you open the package. You get the hinges, 2 quadrants, and the screws. The screws include a steel screw that you use to tap the holes. That's especially important with the brittle woods like cherry. But what I want to point out, just as an introduction, is you can see how this side has the barrel that you see on the end grain, and this side doesn't. This part goes into the box. This part goes into the lid. When you install the quadrant, you can see how one of the prongs is a little bit bigger than the other prong. The end with the big prong needs to go into the part of the hinge that becomes the lid. And what we're going to do later, after the hinges are fitted, the box is completed, it's varnished, it's polished, ready for final assembly, I add a roller pin to that smaller prong. These are roller pins. They're about 3/32 inch diameter, and they come about a 1/2 inch long. I cut them down to a 1/4 inch, and I put those in here after everything's assembled, so it's impossible for it to come out. I do that because that's what Brusso does on the larger hinge. It's the HD680s, and you can see, I don't want to open the package and lose the parts, but the quadrants have a roller pin in the end of the quadrant with the smaller prong, and that's to keep it from coming apart. It's an extra security measure, so I add those to the smaller hinge, but not until the end. When I open the box, you can see the hinges, the way they work, and how the very special shape of the mortise that's needed. Additionally, there has to be a smaller mortise that cuts a recess so that the quadrant goes down deeper. I do the shallow mortise for the hinge leaves with a router and a template, and then I do the smaller, narrower, but deeper mortise for the quadrant on the mortising machine. And we'll get into all that now. But the first thing I want to do is to switch gears from a box that already has a hinge in it to the box I was working on, the demonstration box. It has the dovetails are cut and sanded. And the next step is to separate the lid from the box on the table saw. And we're going to do that now and then get set up to cut the mortises for the hinges. I'm ready to separate the lid from the box. I just wanted to show what I'm doing. The lines there split that dovetail pin right in the middle, so there'll be equally sized pins on the top and the bottom where the lid meets the box. I've got the table saw blade is raised just maybe a 32nd above the thickness of the sides of the box. I'm going to cut 3 sides. So I'm back at the bench. I've separated the 2 halves of the box. I've got 2 pieces of mahogany in the back just as shims so that I can get these aligned. Everything looks great. The inside of the box looks good. I have a little ridge I need to sand down, but it fits. The lid fits. There's no wobble. There was no twist when I separated the parts. Everything's looking good. I'm just going to take a sanding block with some 120 grit, clean up the edges, and then we'll lay out for the mortises. At this point, there's one really critical issue. That is to scribe the center line of the sides so that we can center the mortise on that line and get the hinge placed in the center of the sides. And so I'm going to get a scribe and figure that out right now. The sides of the box are 5/8 of an inch thick. And so I set the scribe at 5/16. And I'm scribing just in the area where the hinges will be at. I don't want to see the scribe line beyond where the hinge leaves or hinge flaps are. Now the next step is to set the templates. These are the templates. I want to do a quick introduction before I talk about how important it is to get everything very well aligned. The templates have a right and a left, right, left, and they fit between the 2 pieces. The router has a bushing and cuts the recess for the hinges by the bushing following the edge of this cutout. the cutouts are identical so that they fit both the right and left hand hinge. I screwed them on. I used to try to put both templates on one beam, the centerpiece. The centerpiece looks like this, and that's what aligns and holds everything together. I used to try to do that with one centerpiece, but after you glue up a box and you shave the dovetails down and you sand it, every box is slightly different in the width. So I've changed that, and now I have, I don't know if it's really important to see this, but in the center of this space is a line with a knife on both ends. And that knife line has to align with this scribe line. That's the only way to keep everything centered. So in addition to aligning the knife line with the scribe line, you need a straight edge to align both sides. Everything has to be aligned and confirmed, and then I clamp it here and I clamp it with a pipe clamp here, and then I route both of the hinge flap recess mortises. I do it pretty much all at once, and so I'm going to get it aligned now and show you how that works. So this is the alignment. I have the scribe lines and the knife mark inside the template aligned. I've got them clamped on the ends and in the center. I leave room between this beam and the clamp for a straight edge to make sure that the sides line up. That's as good as I can get it. Any misalignment is going to show up when you close the lid. So it's really critical to put the time into this. One of the things that happens is that because the lid is up on blocks, when you clamp it, it tends to kind of move out of alignment, and then you'll feel the template will rock. And if you can use that as a test to make sure that these two platforms are flat, like this one's rocking now, that means that I've clamped this in a way that this end is down a little bit. So I have to loosen the clamp, lift it up above the block, just a 64th, and tighten it up in a way that this surface and this surface are not just parallel, but perfectly coplanar. That's a critical issue, and we'll talk about the depth of cut and the thickness of the hinge leaves in just a second. Okay, we have everything's aligned. The platforms are flat. The surfaces of the sides are coplanar. Everything's in a good alignment, side to side, front to back, in elevation. Now we need to get the router set up. I'm using a Hitachi router. It's a 1/2 inch bushing and a 5/16 inch diameter bit. The last issue is the depth of cut. And I'm going to try to show this. I don't know if it's going to work out, but if you look between the leaves up at the barrel, there's about a 64th of an inch space. So that means that each leaf, when it fits into the sides, has to be recessed about a 1/28th of an inch. That's a very small amount. The way I do that, and I'll show you this with the router. The router goes in here, and this, right now, the bit is touching the wood surface. I set the depth of cut to the thickness of the leaf, but I add one piece of masking tape and that's about a 1/28 of an inch. And this is all, I think it's asking a lot for any wood shop to be able to work to these tolerances, but that's what we need to do if we want to get the cut that we get. I'm going to route the recesses and then put the flaps in, maybe with just one screw on each flap, and test the fit. Okay, so I'm going to take this apart and then screw the hinges in place. I think I may have to trim just one corner to get the hinges to fit, but I'll break this apart and we'll see how things fit. Things are looking pretty good in that the flaps fit in, they're recessed just the right amount. The one issue that I think I have at this point, get this in place. I'm going to pull the camera out just for a second so you can see this. This hinge is really well centered, but this one, you can see it's shifted somewhere. It's like between a 64th and a 32nd to the left. So what I'm going to do, this right here is the end of the dovetail, and when you pull the hinge into place, that can pop out. So I'm going to take the flaps out. I'm going to soak that end grain with super glue, let that cure, and then be back and put the hinge in. Okay, you can see the super glue is on that edge. I'm going to clean it up just a little bit, but I did it on both sides just to be consistent. And I'm going to let that cure, clean it up, and then we'll put the screws in. To get the screws in, it's pretty self-evident. I get the hinges in place. I only put in one screw at this time because we may need to make adjustments. So I put screws in just this one hole on both sides. One critical thing to mention at this point, these screws in the back, if I can show that, these screws in the back are very close to this back edge, so I drill them at about somewhere between like a 1 and 2 degree angle going this way. This is especially important. I'm going to pull this out. With, I can show that, the screw hole that goes through this end grain of this dovetail, if that's close, that breaks that end grain out. So this hole especially has to be done on a little bit of an angle. And that is what I am going to do now. I'm just going to show drilling a hole. You guys have probably seen that. You don't need to see that again. I'm using a 3/32 diameter drill. I do all this by hand. I put wax. With the Brusso screws, they give you one steel screw to tap the holes. I do all this just with a screwdriver. I don't do this with the drill. And it's not really until this point that you can feel that little bit of a recess from adding the masking tape. And so I'm going to put a brass screw in this hole before I do that hole. Okay, that looks great. I'm going to do the other one, and then we're going to test close the lid and then talk about the quadrant. I have all the screws in place, and it's time to test the fit. Side to side is really good. This front is forward less than a 64th, but this front is forward. The lid projects past the box by about a 32nd. I can maybe show it better. Can you see that? It's going to be hard to see. Right there, it's just about a 32nd off, where this one right at that edge, it's less than a 64th. So looking pretty good, but not perfect. The good news is that the sides align very well, because that is a real problem. And let me take a minute and I'll show how to make that adjustment. What has to happen is the lid has to get moved backwards. And so to do that, If I took this screw out and pushed this backwards, that wouldn't do it. What I need to do is shave this edge and this radius, maybe a 32nd. There must have been some sawdust or something in the template, and that's what did it. So I'm going to shave that back by hand by pulling this forward. I'm pushing this backwards, and that is what needs to be done. I'll do that right now. These are the lines I've drawn to show where I'm going to shave this hinge mortise. I'm going to cut it here, just maybe a 64th or a 32nd. This part had a little gap, so I'm not going to take as much. It's going to be just a very fine shaving, and then we'll refit. I'm using a carving tool to get into this area and just open that up. And then in this with a straight chisel. And then use the carving tool around that edge. And now we'll refit. You can't see I did it in one try, but I've done this now a couple of times and I've got a pretty good fit. So I'm going to install just one screw in that top hole. And now fit it to the box. And test the fit. And that looks good. It's got just a 64th and a little bit of a racking. I think when I put in the other screws, that'll pull into alignment. But what's important, even though there's a little bit of a space there, that this aligns. It's hard to see. So that this is flush. I need to put in the extra screws to pull it down tight. And maybe just shave a little bit. But you can see I'm going to pull it out and show the front edge. That the alignment of the two pieces with the flaps looks really good. I take a pencil, I mark where I need to put the mortise for the quadrant. I'm going to take the hinges off and get set up on the mortiser, and I'll bring you back when that's ready. These are the pencil marks for the mortise for the quadrant. I also just traced the holes for the other leaves because the mortise for the quadrant should be as big as possible without interfering with the screws. And so I put those locate those screw holes just so I know that I'm not going too far. It's hard to see, but the quadrant is about 3/32 of an inch thick, but I'm using about a 3/16 inch diameter router bit. I'm cutting, the depth of cut is about 7/16 of an inch deep. And what I found is that the smaller diameter cutters, if I used an end mill or a router bit, or this is a spiral upcut router bit, they would break. And so I'm using 3/16 because I can get them to work without breaking. And so I've cut the mortises for the quadrants, and I'm going to try to get screws into these and see how those things fit together. Okay, moment of truth. Were the quadrant mortises deep enough? They're a little tight right there. Everything aligns, but it's rubbing somewhere. There's a little bit of spring back. I'll have to go and work those mortises. Just maybe there's a little bit of dust in the bottom, or they have to be just a tiny bit deeper. But that's it for now. That's as close as I'm going to take it. That's as close as the fitting is going to get today. There's just the tiniest bit side to side that I'll have to pull out, and the front is just wonderful. So the next episode, setting the lock, will be easier because this aligns so well. And I'm just going to tweak things a little bit and get this. It's not even a 64th. And you can feel it almost wants to go into place, but there's something pushing it out. And that's it. Thank you for watching. I look forward to the next video.